Bethany.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome to the Healing Collective podcast, where we explore the paradox of healing at the individual and the collective level.
Join us as we invite guests to share their personal paths to freedom.
Just bringing in a deep breath. I just want to bring attention to our bodies. This beautiful being that is us in this third dimension. The aliveness that courses through our veins as oxygen, as blood. Just forgetting the past, forgetting the future, and being here now. Think about the joy of what it is to be together in connection. The love, the presence of just human touch, even though we are not physically together. I can imagine just hugging both of you right now. Feel tender and warm. And just an awareness of what the universe is creating here and now through this magnificent creation. And open your eyes.
Beautiful.
Thanks for being our first guest to presence us. I love that.
So J Ratio, we start all of our podcasts by asking our guests to identify themselves to the listeners in any way that they choose. How might you let our listeners know who you are on the planet?
Oh gosh. So who I am on the planet, I would say I am a non-binary queer being. And I like to leave it open like that because there's so much labeling that happens in this dimension that is both beautiful and can be so limiting. I've had a lot of labels and I utilize a lot of labels, but I think just a queer, non-binary being who loves joy and connection and being part of this cosmic universe. Like that is really what I want people to know me as on the planet, beyond everything else that I am in all of my roles.
You killed that question. I feel like we haven't had anyone people are like, like normally when we ask people like, oh, you're like, here we go. Here it is.
So, I mean, does that point to something? Like, have you experienced or feel like you've had to actually think about how you identify yourself and be more vocal about that and be more intentional about it? I mean,
yeah, I think growing up and being somebody who is connected to like healing modalities or anything that is outside of the traditional life that people live, there are labels that are always thrown at us, and there's a rejection of that and an acceptance of that. And I think for me in my like healing journey and experience, it's been helpful in the beginning to really have labels about who I was, what I was here to do and be. And as I've gone through this journey, I've really learned that like I've also identified with those too much and created barriers for myself in my expansion because I was like, this is all I will ever be with this specific label. Thinking about mental health and the diagnoses in that way, or just being like a gay man or a queer person. What does that actually mean? And there's so many different definitions, and I'd rather people just experience my energy and allow myself to experience my energy outside of the labels that I can give myself and other people.
So for listeners, Jay's one of my closest friends, and I think it is this question of experiencing their energy is super important because I am always able to experience your energy. And so for listeners, I just want them to know how I experience your energy. And I just remember meeting you, and there's just a dynamic field that you hold that is it has a texture and a distinction that is so unique and powerful. It really stands out from most other people that I am connected to. And it was so telling. And so I just was like, I have to stay connected to this energy and have knowing you and all the aspects of who you are, because you didn't even go into like, there's so many other parts of your identity and how you experienced life that you didn't even go into in that part. Yeah, I just experienced your energy as really, really such a gift and so dynamic and too big and unique to put into any label. It is hard to find vocabulary for the experience of you.
And that's been part of my struggle, I think, too, especially now as I'm stepping into a new and another iteration of myself, is like, what is my body of work going to look like? How do I even title that? Because there's so much vibrationally that I connect to, and language can be really limiting at times. And I'm like, I don't want to have this big run on sentence to try and fit every little thing that is part of me in there. And yet, leaving it broad is up to interpretation. And I think that's also part of the human experience, is what is our interpretation of each other and our vibrations.
I'm thinking about like I've been getting to know Jay via a lot of his like Instagram stories and stuff like that, their Instagram stories, and like dancing and singing, and yeah, totally joy filled. And it's terrifying to me because I think that that's still a part of myself that I've like backed away from. Like there's an element of freedom of expression and being witnessed in it that I still get a little scared. So even doing drama triangles in front of people, which I literally do all the time, there's a layer of editing that's still happening. Like I'm still pretty aware and there's still a little bit of freeze that happens for me. So it's been really instructive to watch the videos and like have this vision of like dropping that layer and just being like, this is the energy that's here and I'm sharing it all the way, because I could feel myself like not quite share that there's still a lens, there's still a layer, and I still hide a little bit. And it's like scary and inspiring. It's like aversion attraction.
Yeah, for me, when I think about that too, like there used to be a point in time where I would be, posting things like that on Instagram, dancing and lip syncing and all of that. And I would be so concerned about like, did I get every little lip sync word right? And like, I have to make sure my butt didn't look right in that little dance turn, and I wouldn't use a clip. And now I'm at a point where it's all about, again, the energy of it. And like, I just want to have fun and like create someone that in myself who is just dancing to have fun and showing off this beautiful dress that I just purchased, and like wanting to live as free as possible.
Well, it's really instructional for me because I do that when I'm by myself. I dance in my house. I sing in the shower when no one's here. And then when people are around, I'm like, like I still do a little bit of that. So I know what it feels like to not have all these egoic control filters. I do it when I'm alone. And so watching you do it, yeah, I think it's like asking me something. So it's actually been like, it's a thing that I've noticed in the last couple of months of like, and I work with this group of women, and we do these transition ceremonies for people. So these truly ceremonial, like opportunities to witness and support people in a moment of transition. And we're launching the business. We're kind of practicing on each other. So the whole group, we're doing ritual for each other and doing ceremony for each other. We actually have one tonight. And it's my turn next. And I'm like, I don't know what I want my ceremony to be. Like, I don't know what I want. I don't know. Like, I don't have this big thing that I'm like, oh, this is really what's happening for me right now. But they're all really good singers. And like when they'll all sing at ceremonies and like, I don't, like, I'll like be with the person that's being sung to or something, or take photos. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I ask them to help me learn how to sing a song and sing it or something like that? That sounds like the most terrifying thing I could possibly do. But That's the thought I'm having right now. Maybe that's part of the invitation. And I wonder how scared I would be. And I wonder how much joy I would access in doing something that maybe I've kind of always wanted to do.
I love that. I love thinking about things that you might have always wanted to do. And yet we have all these filters and like external stimuli that like keep us from that, whether it's like fear of judgment or fear of looking silly, fear of whatever. Um, there's a way that I definitely see that one in myself and have known that one in myself. And yet there's something about for me, in being like deeply authentic. And even when I am in a group of people, being able to still like I will literally be walking down the street with my headphones and listening to music and like pretending I'm a conductor and like just even though people will look at me and be like, what is happening? And I'm like vibing to the music and I can imagine myself just dancing in the universe. And there are moments where I'm like, oh wow, people must have all these judgments. And I'm like, and then what if there are people like you who are out there and are like, I wish I could do that. Like I want to do that. Like that feels more inspiring to me, which is part of why I'm able to like, yeah, I am totally fine being that person.
Wow. I wonder how many people have witnessed you and are like, I wish I could sing. Like that just must happen to so many people. Yeah.
I hope
Jaye,
so.
I would love, Jaye, if this podcast is also called The Healing Collective. And we're really interested in kind of so many paradoxes around healing. And one being the paradox of individual healing versus collective healing. Another paradox we talk a lot about is, this paradox that we're not broken and we also need healing. And we don't need healing at all. There's so many ways to look at healing. And so we're super curious from each guest's perspective what their journey around healing is and how that informs how and who they show up as and what they're interested around in healing others. So if we were to start somewhere, I'd love to start with your own kind of healing journey. How would you explain healing in your own life to people listening?
That feels like such a loaded question in this moment, and it doesn't have to be. I so even circling back to what I said in the beginning of the call about like labels. So in the realm of mental health, I have been diagnosed with certain disorders. So I've been diagnosed as bipolar type 2, I have been diagnosed with anxiety, and for a long time, just going down that path with a therapist and a psychiatrist was very helpful in my healing journey, just to understand that I was not, um, just to understand that I wasn't broken and that I didn't have all these things wrong with me. Because that was a big part of what was this rejection from society and who I was, whether that be from family, from peers. Like there was just a rejection of who I was. And there was a way that through healing in such a clinical way, I was able to rise up into a more functioning state of being. So that was one of the first steps for me, where I was able to just have cognitive experience of like thinking through what is here and what is true for me. As I've transitioned out of that sort of dynamic, and I really don't identify any longer with those labels, simply because of how I experience the universe, how I experience the planetary alignment and my being in connection to vibration. I no longer see um, swings of highs and lows as part of a bipolar diagnosis, and so much as me reacting to what's happening on the planet and in the universe. And I think that has been a big expansion for me, to not be limited in thinking that I am only ever going to be someone with a diagnosis from some person. And that has really evolved my ability to step into more for myself. Um, Now, when it comes to healing, I've really dabbled with so many different modalities and different energies. So, years ago, I started doing shamanic training with a teacher and so forth, and learning how to do shamanic drum journeys. And that was really too where I was able to connect and see a bigger part of myself through vibration. The drum beat is something I deeply connect to so much. It's part of why I love the dance so much, is there's something about the beat and the rhythm that, um, for me, brings up my vibration and brings up my aliveness. And in that, I was able to connect to amazing spirit guides. I was able to connect to lots of energies that were beautiful forces, and some that were really showing me deep shadows, and some that were really showing me returning back to that idea of like being broken and there's nothing to be like fixed because it's all in like service. Like seeing these deep shadows and wounds of my little personas that want to come out and fight and retreat, and like I was able to really see all of that happening in like a cosmic way. Um, and then combining that with the healing that I've learned through more recent traditions, or not even traditions, but bodies of work like conscious leadership, and being able to get on the drama triangle and be able to do a persona interview and connect to little ones who were hurt by my parents. I've recently had activation from that, and um, it all is in service. So I love that I can, for me, my healing journey has really been about combining all of these different things and still continuing to combine them with different mentors and teachings and modalities of medicine and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, and there's so many layers, and it's good to return back to other ones and new ones. And for me, that works.
I love hearing about how everyone's journey around healing is different. And I want that to be reflected in the podcast, because people who might listen to it might have all these totally different experiences. I feel like when I was talking about this, or how I have so far in some of the episodes we've released, I sort of was pointing to these moments of like a moment of deep healing that I was aware of. And I guess what I'm really appreciating right now is that you're like, I've gone through these different, like, steady phases of like these different chapters, and it's been this like steady thing that I'm moving towards, and it's like this evolution that's intentionally like slower. And I think you even said, there's like the clinical part, and then there's these other parts. And I love just that you're even mentioning stuff like, I've not heard of like shamanic drumming as a healing modality, but like that makes so much sense to me. And even I'm making up like how in your body it allows you to be, because it's like vibrational and instinctual and like associated with movement and stuff like that. And so I like making sure people are aware that there's like 10,000 ways to move through things, and like there's no one way that's better than any other way. Yeah. So I'm like really appreciating you for like walking us through all these different ways, and how they each just took their time, and like each one was of service, and a build, like a slow build.
Yeah, I think it's funny too, because I definitely know there are moments like when I had my first soul retrieval, which is a shamanic process with my teacher. Like that was a turning point for me to have this soul experience come through, where I was just laying on the table and she's drumming around me and doing all of this like interdimensional work. That was a pivotal moment where I know that ever since then, I've been available to new things. So it's interesting because I can pinpoint certain moments like that too that occur. And yet, for me, I think it is important to talk about the entire experience. And like, I started out going to just regular therapy with a therapist, and like taking time off of work on an FMLA leave, and like having to do those things to really integrate into where I am today.
For soul retrieval, because I don't know anything about soul retrieval. I think I've maybe heard somebody mention that, my friend Megan or something, but like, can you walk me through what that is
Well,
about? Because
and I would say interdimensionality. Those are two things we haven't fully touched. And I think you would be a great introduction to those.
yeah, like I'm in 6th grade. Because around this I
Yeah, no, I get it. That's so in the tradition that I'm taught in and that I know about, the idea is that we are always whole. That is 100% true. And when we experience trauma, there are pieces of ourselves that leave, that go out and are in the cosmos somewhere else. But when that happens, because we are always whole, other things other things come in and can be part of our new system, part of our chakra system, creating blocks and edges, entities, or whatever you'd like to say. And a soul retrieval is really the shamanic practitioner connecting interdimensionally into the cosmos and into the spirit world and calling that piece of the soul that has left back into the body. And it is basically creating an integration with what's already here and what has left you in that traumatic experience. So that's like the basis of a soul retrieval. I know people who go through many of them just based off of the experiences they've had and so forth. So I've had a few, and the first one was definitely like a huge shift in my healing because I did feel a different sense of wholeness and remembrance of what it's like to be in this body.
Okay, maybe I do know something about that because there's well, like I've been doing this somatic experience therapy with my SE practitioner, and she also does like energy work and stuff like that, and she's a traditional trauma therapist as well. Like, but there was something was coming up about like I almost drowned when I was like 2 years old. And we were kind of going through that, and her story, she said something very similar of like, when you think you're going to die, like something shuts down and actually something can kind of leave.
Yeah.
And so I was like in a river in New Hampshire under the water for a minute, like taking in water and couldn't get up. There was a current of water. And my mom's a nurse, and she ended up like saving my life, like dragging me out of the water. But it was a minute. And I was like, I mean, I was fully frozen and freeze was my flavor of choice around fear. And so we were working on that, and it was crazy. And we kind of, it's a somatic thing. So we were kind of working through that and how I would change it. Like if I could redo it, and you're kind of completing the thing that didn't get to complete and almost reimagining it for your body so that you can kind of release that experience that's like living inside you, like trauma. And it was really crazy. And she said that she's like, my story is like something broke off, and I couldn't even really picture me at that age. Like I couldn't, it was far separate enough from me that I couldn't even really bring it in all the way. And so we were going kind of slowly with it, and I could kind of picture something like an energy, but I couldn't actually see like a clear picture in my mind of myself at 2 having that experience happen. And we went through this whole thing, and like by the end of it, I was coughing. I literally was coughing up like water. It's like I completed something, and that was real crazy. Like I actually had to go to the bathroom. It was in this room, and I had to go over and like spit in the sink. And she was like nonplussed. She's like, yeah, this is what happens when we do this stuff, where I was like, this is trippy. This is a crazy thing that's happening right now. And like the stuff that I was getting scared about in those moments, I think was tied to some of that. Like I think I could die. Like when fear really comes up, even if it's just egoic fear and not a life-threatening thing, if we've had an experience like that, I think that can really live in our system. And that's what I was reminded of when you were talking.
Well, so it's so interesting that you bring that up, because while that's in a completely different modality, there's still, I love hearing about similarities in how healing is done, because it just, even in like, I also do Reiki and perform Reiki for clients. And I've had moments where I've had clients on the table who literally just start to cry because they're like, I can feel my mother hugging me, and I haven't felt that in so long. And it's like such a healing moment for them. And there are so many ways that we can all come to a similar healing experience. And I love like the idea of being somatic and integrated in that. Like that just, I feel warm and tingly thinking about that being done in other ways too.
Yeah, like in one of my first medicine journeys, I had this thing, I was having this whole experience, and I hear in my mind's voice, I asked like, what's happening to me? And I heard, this is a soul retrieval. And I had never heard at that point what a soul retrieval was. And so I asked the person guiding me, I'm like, what's a soul retrieval? And they're trying to explain to me, wow, I'm actually in medicine space, having this experience. And for me, it was a download or an experience of being embodied by a Native American ancestor or part of myself. But the reason I bring that up is when you were talking, Bethany, I'm like, that's medicine work. Like you did medicine work with your somatic practitioner. I did medicine work with a chemical. Like Jay experiences medicine work sometimes through drumming. And so this idea that we are getting to the same place. And what's also coming up so much in my reality is this idea that we are all energy. At the core of everything is just energy, and how much we use that word energy as a culture. I hear it all the time, but we don't actually believe, in my opinion, that we're actually energy. And so the idea that you would need to complete something from when you were 2 or 3 years old, from like a logical, I am just this body in this life standpoint, doesn't make a lot of sense. But from a standpoint of, you are an energetic field full of every experience you've ever had. And sometimes that energy gets clogged or incompleted. Like, that's a whole different paradigm to experience, our reality, to experience ourselves, and to think about healing, and why Reiki works, or why different modalities even exist. And I know I kind of experienced Jay as this master of energy. And I kind of have two questions. So feel free to interpret this however you want to. I mean, I know you identify as an interdimensional being. That's a way that I often identify. So I'd love for you to like explain that in a way that people could try that on, and then link that to your experience of energy in general and what that's like for you.
I think for me, I can feel in my body shifts when people come into the room. I can feel the gut wrenching feeling when I see someone who I've never met before, and I just know there's an instant aversion or attraction, whether that's good or bad, right? And I think even just using that as an example, to know that there is something beyond the physical third dimension experience. That's a perfect example, is to be able to say, I know that my energy goes up, and I've never talked to this person, I've never met this person, and yet they've just walked into the room. And being able to expand upon that and utilize intuition, I think that's probably the best word that we have in our vocabulary, and being able to connect to that vibration alongside all of the issues and things that happen, to us and for us. Um, what's also coming to me is this idea of like trust. What does it actually mean to be trusting ourselves, and trusting like the directions that we move in, right? So if we know we have a big job interview, or we know that we want to move and shift our life and move across the country, and we're going to trust in ourselves and trust in something to happen that we want, we do a certain amount of things to make that happen. But ultimately, trust is this figurative vibration. It is not a literal thing that we can actually have and say. It is a vibration, just like love. So when I think about love and trust and intuition, that's how I would really talk about interdimensionality. It's just a bigger version of those things, and being able to trust that when I am listening to the drum and I am now journeying, that is me connecting to other things. That's me knowing and feeling that somatic body experience, that something is happening. And I trust that because I know my body and I know who I am. So I think being able to use that like finite in the 3D world is probably the best and easiest way to try on the bigger versions that may be outside of our comfort zone. Because I mean, when I first started, like, I've always had an attraction to anything interdimensional, which is why I would identify as an interdimensional being. But there have absolutely been moments where I know that it scares me. And I'm like, but this 3D, I know that this is a cell phone. That is something I know. I know that this is an inhaler and it makes my lungs work. But do I know that my soul was being made whole again? But I can feel that. And I can trust myself enough to say, yes, that is the interdimensionality happening in this present moment.
This is hitting on something that's coming up for me. I feel like Lauren already knows what I'm going to say, but it's like, I have okay, this is a question for you that's all about me, which is probably true of all my questions. But So I am in a place right now where there's a thing that's happening where the vibrations, I'm like, yes. And I'm like, yes, more of this. And every time I'm experiencing this person, I'm like, yes, I have a yes to this. This is good. Like, I want to move towards this. And then when I'm not in their presence, like I'm getting feedback from other people that are like, no, you shouldn't do that. Don't do that. No, that's don't do that. And I go, And I've been going, I wouldn't say like massively triggered, but I am like aware. I'm scared that I don't know what I'm doing. And that I'm gonna like, you know what I mean? Or at least I'm aware of the part of myself that's scared. I'm also in touch with the part of myself that's like, I know what the fuck I'm doing. And I know that this energy is good and what I'm attracted to right now. And I know I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do anyways. And so I'm curious about this whole idea of trust and how you experience that in yourself. And if you're in touch with like almost like I think I confuse like a really naive, hopeful, super optimistic part of myself with an experience in my body of trust. And do you have a distinction of those two things? Are you in touch with a hopeful, optimistic, naive part of yourself? And like, how do you differentiate?
I am an Enneagram 7, so I connect to full body yeses real quick when it's fun and exciting. And I will just be like, yes, I want to do that. Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh. And for me, I can actually override some no's because of that high, like, oh, that just seems so fun and exciting. So I really have had to take a moment to discern. And I actually would say it's something that I'm deeply in practice in even of now, and not letting that 7 Enneagram excitement take over, because I can be more of a yes to things than a no because of that. Um, and how I'm really able to differentiate that is connecting into one, what I want with my mind. Like, what does my mind even tell me? Like, logically, what's here? Not to use that as any sort of like definitive evidence, but it's just another check in. Like, my mind says, okay. And then what does my body want and say? And then, I mean, I personally, I love to use uh, tarot cards and just get feedback. I don't use it as a definitive answer necessarily, but I just say, what is this teaching me? Um, and just that ability to again trust in something that is outside of myself, like that actually helps me a lot, and just restructure my thought process. So I don't know that I have a better answer than that, but I use tarot cards a lot when I'm in that moment of like, do I trust my body and mind in this moment? Am I just super excited because that's going to be awesome? Like, you know, um,
I do want to stamp something with that though, because I had a similar experience. Um, Especially, I just remember being really rocky kind of during a time, Bethany. I mean, we've kind of talked about this, but just to kind of make it public, there was a time. So for me, I worked a 12-step program for 7 years, and during that 12-step program, I was like trying to clean up my life. I had made all these different mistakes, and what I experienced was mistakes. And I had a sponsor, and I just became like this person that was about humility and following other people's guidance. But the other piece of it was I didn't trust my own guidance. I would sit in these circles every day and say, I'm an addict. And I mean, there's kind of an assumption that around your addiction, you cannot trust yourself. And things started to shift for me because I remember being at listening to a talk about a man healing his cancer through shamanism and through sweat lodges and things like that. And I was like, if somebody can do that, if someone can heal themselves from cancer, like certainly I can heal myself from addiction. Certainly I'm not going to need to say, hi, my name is Lauren and I'm an addict for the rest of my life and be so careful. But it required me to start stepping out and being like, and step into things that the same exact situations that have been true of my addictive behavior, and test my own self-trust and test my own discernment. And during that time, I started using oracle cards and tarot cards also. And I remember pulling stuff and being like, well, maybe that was just random. Or, you know what, like maybe I just really wanted that card to show up. And I would even question the cards that I pulled. But over time, I remember learning, like actually hearing a message, like to trust what I pulled. And what I understand now, or what I believe now, is that the universal field, quantum field that's around all of us, wants to show up and help us anytime we ask for it. But because this is a universe where our will is a part of that, then we have to ask for that help. But what was important was that I wasn't asking for another human being's help. I had done a lot of that. And it was a season where I needed to ask for help from my spiritual guides. I needed to ask for help from my own inner voice. I need from my higher self. And the cards were a way for me to kind of play with the universe and see if the feedback from the universe was matching what I was feeling or sensing inside myself. And that really helped me to develop an intimate relationship with something bigger than me, which ironically is the foundation of the 12 steps anyway, is to surrender your life to a higher power, right? Greater than you. And it just became a more complex relationship.
That's so when Jay said their whole thing, they said tarot, and I was like, oh shit, because I've noticed lately, I've been like my friend Mia, who's on the podcast recently, I've been like, I need some cards, and she's been pulling stuff, and she's like cheerleading me. She's the only person who's like, no, do it. This is good. No, the cards say, and so I'm like, cool, I'll go with that. And I'm kind of just using it as another piece of feedback from somebody else. Like I think I'm kind of using it from below the line or a fear state a little bit to stabilize myself. But the articulation you just gave, Lauren, which is like, can I use that to confirm my own vibes? Like it sounds like steps.
Well, you
like,
pulling your own cards. I'm even saying like you're deferring to her interpretation, and that's her relationship with the universe and her interpreting what the universe is connected to her, which I'm not undermining that at all. But there's a whole different new relationship of you trusting that you have that connection to the universe, and those answers can come directly to you. And those answers are outside just your ego or your personality or your naive one. And that can actually point you and help affirm your decisions or affirm your inner intuition.
Yeah, it reminds me of like developmental stages of like starting to align to your own, to trusting yourself. And I mean, and that's part of what we're doing as coaching is specifically holding a field of, you know what to do. You know what to do. You think you don't. You're scared and triggered and you're doing all this stuff because you are scared. And when we move through all of that and like provide these pathways for you to get back in touch with yourself, you know what to do. We don't give any coaching. I mean, we don't give any advice in coaching. We're not like, I think you should do this. Like, I've never said that. So it's like, because I don't think I've ever said it. So
we're helping people come back to their inner voice and separate from fear and distinguish between fear, because that's what it's. So when we say you always know, then I hear in my head is like, well, then why do I have so many different answers in my head, and it's like, well, which one am I supposed to choose? And so I think coaching and even some of these practices are really to distinguish that we each have a true inner voice that is the truth of who we are. And we came here with that voice to a certain extent, and we were socialized out of it in a lot of ways. And I'd love actually, Jay, to hear, what's coming up for you when we talk about all of this, and especially this idea of getting socialized out of our inner voice, our inner truth.
Yeah, I think that's been part of the rejection that I felt by being in my authentic self. Really put me in a space of like having to detach from things that were interdimensional and trusting myself and my guidance, because that was weird and that wasn't accepted by my peers. And I wanted to have friends and I was young. I mean, I've been connected to this kind of reality. I remember even in fourth grade learning about crystals from the safe key instructor and being connected to that. And like, then as I got older, I, in that rejection, I closed those pieces of myself off. And I think what really brought me back, obviously, in this healing journey, was being able to trust myself again and being able to see that, like, when I make decisions that are for me, and I will say the most pivotal one that really transformed my life was when I got divorced and when I left my ex-husband. And I really was like, I have been living a life now for the past 25 years for everybody else except for me, and because of this prescribed life that I have to live. And um, the moment that I actually stood up for myself and the moment I actually said, I don't want this, even though I have great money, I have a house, we have all these pets, we're going to have kids soon, like everything that the pieces of paper said I should want. And then when I was like, but I don't want that, like, that's not who I'm here to be on the planet. I don't want to climb the corporate ladder in that sense. I don't want to do all those things. That moment of truth and courage and not responding to the fear, like that was just such a shift in my entire being. And that's a very three-dimensional thing that happened, but it was such a pivotal moment in my aliveness and my awakening into trust and knowing that there's something more for me on this planet.
Well, I just want to stamp too, like this is a paradox of healing, right? Like we do all this healing to come back to the truth of who we always were, or the key voice. And like you can track back to fourth grade and even before that, I'm sure, to things that you're just now in your, I think your 33rd year, allowing yourself to do, right? And to be. And that, I know that's true for me. I feel like that's kind of what you're bringing up, Bethany. And like, it goes back to what you said about like, we were always whole. In some ways, we just forgot our own wholeness.
Yeah, like I think babies know everything. And then we just slowly train them out of the knowing. Like my kids are still at an age where I feel like they're really tuned in. They have not yet been totally socialized out of their own experience. They're not gaslighted themselves constantly because not enough people are gaslighting them for them to pick up that habit just yet. And so the stuff that they tune into and know and say, because they don't think they're not supposed to say it or that that's not a real thing, I just think there's like so much wisdom in it. And the older they get, I can feel it shifting, I guess. But yeah, just remembering all of our knowing, like, I don't know, maybe when
Yeah.
babies come down off the astral plane, they literally, like, in that 3 week when a newborn baby is just like kind of mostly asleep, kind of awake, and maybe looks around for a minute, and it's like potentially an all-knowing being at that moment and just slowly forgets over time.
Yeah, I think I love that you bring that up about like babies and their wholeness too, because I think there's like all of the ways that we're gaslit and like trained out of our feeling state. Like babies just like, I'm gonna cry because something's not right. And like they know something's not right. Yet we will be like, something's not right. I'm still here at work and I'm just gonna do all the things and put on a happy face. And we are so socialized out of honoring our true feeling state and honoring our true body state. And that is something that, like, coming back into our wholeness is just like, what is the actual truth of my feelings? I think that's such an incremental stage for people too. It's like, what it can be really hard for people to identify that. And I think when in my work of like aliveness, like all of the feelings are aliveness for me, even though I'm not a fan of like anger and sadness. But like, I like when I'm in those states, I know I'm feeling super alive. I know that even though I don't love it because I have judgment about that's program judgment, even though my aliveness is like thriving.
I, I'm thinking about, I'm taking the somatic experience practitioner training course. It's like a 3-year course so that I can support people with SE, like the kind that I've been receiving. And one of the first things they say, it's like a 4-day training for the first one. And they're like, we're here to listen to your body. So we're going to be in practice the whole time we're learning. So they're like, if you want to lay down, lay down. If you're burping, burp. If you like, whatever's
You want
happening,
to
like
fart?
listen to what,
I had to say
yeah,
that.
seriously.
Like,
And even yawning and stuff, like actually burping, yawning, that's all stuff.
we need to practice that as the podcast. Like,
Seriously. Well,
just
I have been really conscious of it lately because I'll be on Zoom all day for work. And if I have a yawn, I'm used to going, I'm trying to like
I've
not
been
yawn or
forcing not
something.
yawning this whole time.
and how much freedom there is just in letting yourself yawn, like an involuntary thing about oxygen. And what it actually is pointing to in SE, which is one of the reasons we keep track of it and pay attention to it, when you match your body, it's not holding on so much energy. You're able to release and be more in the flow of energy. Your body just wants to be listened to. That's what the SE sessions are all about. but like yawning and burping and all that stuff, or your stomach growling or your mouth watering, are all signs that you're coming out of a fight or flight fear response of like of having activation and going back down into like rest and relax and rest and digest. So it's really important to look for those. So if our client has trained, like they're not like letting us see a sigh because they're withholding it, we're actually not able to track their nervous system the way that we're trying to. So inviting people into just, I did like 2 hours of my last training from the bath, from a bubble bath with my laptop in the bathroom. And I was like, I feel fine about this. I feel like they're like, take care of yourself, do what you want to do. So that's been trippy, just like thinking about that experience and then bringing it into my normal experience. And that's so simple. Like a baby is just like, yeah, I'm gassy right now, so I'm going to make the noise about it. And we think that's okay for babies, but it's like not okay for us as grown-ups for some reason.
Well, I
Yeah.
also think about how, like, if we, kind of shifting to a conversation more collectively, like, it's actually a revolutionary act. It's actually revolutionary to allow people and make it safe for people to be fully who they are in the past what we would call a professional setting. I mean, if we really unpack what we say when we say professional, often we mean you don't cry, you don't show sides of your personal life. It's this idea that we can compartmentalize who we are into this really almost robotic state of being. And then just when we leave work, that's when you go be fully human. And this is also important, I think. I'm going to just go another level. Like something that I see coming up for listeners, I do work around liberatory culture and supporting organizations to move out of white supremacy culture. And one of the things that we teach around that is trusting people, the people who work for you, trusting their feedback, trusting their bodies, trusting if they say they feel unheard, even if they can't prove it with facts, because that's like a huge way we undermine people's experience is when they say they feel something or they're noticing something, we undermine it because it's a feeling and we don't give the same credibility to feelings as if, how many times have you heard somebody say to you, well, what did I do? Well, can you prove exactly what it was? And so I really think that as good as it feels and as how much, as much as we can say, oh yeah, it just makes me feel good as an individual, to create a culture where collectively we allow people to feel, to express, to show and allow these parts of themselves. And then we honor those parts and we treat them as data points for how we choose to be with one another is like a revolutionary act for collective healing, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Is that why you didn't want to go do a corporate job, Jay?
That's a big part of it. I was really successful in leading call centers. I did really well at that. And I didn't follow the same script that everybody else was, though. So I would do really well, and my teams felt super appreciated and loved and cared for, but they weren't held to silly rules that we had because I wouldn't hold them accountable to silly rules that we had because I thought they were silly. So I was leading through real authenticity. I was leading through like what I had value in. Like people were like, you can't have your phones out. I'm like, I don't care if their phones are out. They're adults. If are they doing their job? And like little things like that made people feel seen and cared for. Like it's just little things like that that had a huge impact. And when I think about and that was at the very beginning of like when I started this like healing journey, but even as a collect, like when I think about the question of like the collective, like the teams that I had found so much value in me and just being who I was authentically. That alone was creating shifts in people in the call center and how we were already operating. And I was honest about what I held people accountable to and what I didn't. And that was really starting to like create shifts in dynamic. Um, and I think about that like trickling into other people and being like, this is what it's like over here. Like, this is how things can be. And I think like thinking about the coaching work that you all do, like it's good that we're doing our own individual healing and when we're supporting people in that, but every vibration and every person we talk to, there's also an element of that I love in that transforming the collective as well.
Well, I hear you saying you chose to trust your employees and not assume the worst and have a bunch of rigidity and like unilateral agreements around you're not trustworthy. I can't really trust you to have your phone on your desk and still do your job. And I think we do that in relationships too. Like that's like it's like the what's our commitment about what like our expectations and like I mean we do it with parenting. I can feel that, like that feels really powerful to me. And I can also feel my naive one who's like, trust everyone to do everything and it's all going to work out. And we don't need any kind of like, so I can feel that, but my energy does go up around, if somebody, I don't remember who, but someone in the CLG community at some point was give me some feedback about like, why don't you trust your kid to be able to do this? They'll probably, rise to the occasion. People are like if you believe that someone can do it, you might be able to reflect something back to them that they're like, I can do that. And you know what? I can do whatever the thing is. I think about that a lot with leadership and I think about it with trust. And I guess I'm thinking about it with healing too, because how powerful our unconscious beliefs about what we're capable of and that we'll just keep creating it. Like, I don't trust men. I will keep creating that. If I believe that unconsciously, I will keep creating that because it's my belief. So like how powerful it is for us to hold different beliefs and reflect different beliefs to other people. And of course, how powerful it is in our own experience when we drop a belief.
I love that when I think about the collective, when I think about us as like a society and a community, like there are ways that I can be like very, very judgmental. And I can see this one in me being like, things are never going to change. Like people are always going to stay in this white supremacist patriarchy, capitalism, and like get really bogged down with that. But then I'm also creating that and participating in that system versus being able to like hold a different vision, like knowing that all these things are still not great, damaging, whatever you want to say, and hold over here for the collective that we are rising above into a new being of that. Like I see that in myself all the time, and I try to have conversations when I see people getting stuck in the drain about it and just like circling and circling. Like, what if there was just a different answer? But like, can this be true and this be true? Can we also like, can we be in this horrible system that isn't serving everybody and know that we are having to trust that something else will change?
Well, I can make it concrete too, as an example, because we talk about this with liberatory culture. So, kind of an assumption that is led and created white supremacy culture is that people aren't trustworthy and that they will only do work if they are controlled and forced to do work in some way, right? Whereas, like in a vision of liberation, we would believe a mindset of like people are inherently trustworthy and inherently want to do their best and bring their best when they're free, when they're thriving. And so think about like in a white supremacy culture, how you would do your pay scale, your performance reviews, what kind of norms you would have at the workplace if you believe that people will only do the right thing if they're controlled and monitored and constantly accountable or disciplined, right? That also informs the way we do management in schools, which I would argue has led to like a school to prison pipeline, because the mindset is if you don't comply, you should be disciplined, you should be punished back into the norm, right? So what kind of systems would we create in organizations and schools? How would we run something if we believed everyone in this building is inherently free to do whatever they choose? We trust that they want to be here, and we trust them to be the very best that they can be, and we want to create an environment where they can be that.
Well, this feels really scary to say, but what I was noticing while you're talking is like I feel like some of the like intentions around working against white supremacy. So even the belief that we are in a white supremacist culture, black and white, we are, you're wrong if you think we're not, is that same consciousness of like maybe not giving people total credit. And there's the truth of like how much of that is woven into the culture. But even like around anti-racism work, it's like, well, if we have to hold, well, what does it look like? Lauren, you tell me, because it's not my work in the world and it is your work in the world. Like, no, you are racist. You just don't realize that we have to go through all the ways. Like, is that another way that we hold ourselves down? Or is that maybe there's a way we can hold ourselves down with that, and there's a way that we can own the paradox of like there is truth in that, and we are more than that, and we are free of that.
Well, I'll go back to kind of what you said earlier. It's like, to me, it's about developmental stages. If we're unaware of something, we first have to bring it into awareness, and we have to identify with it when we haven't before. So, for example, as an addict, I was doing all these behaviors, but I never identified those behaviors as addiction. I never identified those behaviors. I had, in fact, in my experience, they were normalized because I only knew my own life. I only knew my own relationship to sex and alcohol. So when I went into the rooms, and I was in 12-step rooms, and I hear people talking about behaviors and the chaos that they were creating, and I recognize I'm not alone. There's other people who identify this way and who want to shift their experience around sex and alcohol. And so around white supremacy culture and racism, the idea around it is that for most of us, and this was definitely my experience as a white person, until it came into my awareness, I could actually skip over any experience of that existing. I lived in a bubble where racism did not exist for me. And it wasn't until I fell in love with this guy in high school named Dougie, who, like, we got pulled over by the police. We got treated differently at a grocery store when I was 17. And I was like, oh my God, like the world is ending. Like, does anybody know this is going on? Like, that's how naive I was. And he was laughing at me. He was like, you're hilarious. Are you serious? And so what I'll say about, people are pushing back so hard around identifying as racist, one, because they make it mean they're a bad person, versus making it mean we live in a culture where we have decided that different physical racial constructs make one better than the other, created a bunch of systems, including our government, including all these other things around that. And you never have to look at that if you don't want to. So by choosing to become aware of it, by choosing to label it, and then, like I said, with my addiction, at a certain point, I was like, it's not serving me to keep saying every day, hi, I'm Lauren, I'm an addict. When we envision a liberatory culture, a place, these realities where we trust and people inherently trustworthy and they thrive and they free, we're trying to create and imagine a future where racism doesn't exist anymore. And maybe we won't get there in our lifetime, but we're certainly living in the imagination of probably white men who left a government ruled by a king and imagined a place where they could be the king, where they could rule. And that imagination created an entire reality that now we're living in. So that's how I would answer that, is like, it is going back to the both and it's about where we are in our awareness. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like every major theme that we ever end up talking about comes back to the paradox, which is why we've set up our podcast the way we have, like the paradox of healing. Because all of these big topics that we like put our noggins towards and love kind of discussing and getting into, it usually comes down to like, what is our capacity to hold two things as true at the same time? How is it true that I'm a racist and that this whole culture is white supremacist? And how is that not true at the same time? Like, how can I use that as much as I can for my transformation, my healing, the collective's transformation, the collective's healing, and know that that's not all I am? Yeah.
And that life is non-binary.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it's pointing to, which, like, you like what I did there? Well, but like, Jaye, I would love, as we're coming in for a landing, to hear about your purpose as you understand it in the world right now.
Yeah. So just like digesting everything that we just like y'all just talked about, like, and going into this idea of non-binary, um, that is part of my purpose. Like, also, I'll just throw that out there right now. And I think it's radical to be beyond the binary in every state of the word, whether it's in a paradox, whether it's in gender, whether it's in just, yes, I'm doing that, no, I'm doing that. Like when I think about the commitment of a win for all, that is a non binary experience. And I love the idea of thinking about all the different ways that we can heal, all the different ways that we can come to resolution through conflict, through reimagining, like what life can be like outside of a binary. When I think about anti-racism work and people being like, well, it's one or the other. It's like, then someone's got to be in power. It's like, no one has to be in power. What if that was actually the solution? That we were in an interdependent community. And I think I've heard you talk, Lauren, about like this quilt of life and like all the different threads. And I think about that being what non-binary is too. It's like we are all just a different piece of the puzzle. And in this moment in time, there is a different power dynamic, and we can reimagine a different kind of quilt. So I'm going to segue into my purpose now, after I got off that there.
That was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I think my purpose is to show people that. Like even right now, like I love wearing makeup and I love wearing a beard. Like I love doing the both and. I think that it's beautiful and being able to stand in that. So my purpose on this planet really is to show people that they don't have to be any certain way. And that your aliveness can come through you in multiple ways, right? Like it can, even though I don't want it to come through as sadness, like it can come through as sadness. And my aliveness doesn't have to come through having a job that pays me 300,000 a year. It can come through and doing something that's really helping people. Yeah, I get tripped up a lot when I think about like what is my purpose, because I have such a grandiose, or I've been socialized that like my purpose needs to be big and I need to really
or a
help
job or
people
a career or something.
Yeah, like I and I'm still desocializing that. Like even, there's a body of work that I want to be coming out with soon, and I'm playing around with the idea of what is Jaye's playground, and wanting that to be something. And I notice when I start to like sit down and plan, I'm like, oh, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm like, I can't. That's that. How would I ever make that happen? And yet, every time I do shifts and connect with people like the two of you, I'm always reminded of like my aliveness and like it's actually already being done, and it can be just that simple. Um, and I hope that's like when I think about in the beginning, like me posting dancing videos, like it's just that simple.
Right. Like
It
you
can it
showing
can
up
be.
as the truth of who you are is your purpose. And you are doing the thing you're called to do by just being your beingness. And if we are disconnected from that, if we don't know our own voice, we can't really know our purpose. We can't really fully know and be aware of our beingness because we're so busy doing. So that's the paradox is healing can bring you back to the truth of who you are, which is really just beingness.
But there's nothing to do.
There's nothing where there's nothing
There's
to
nothing
do.
to do. Like there's nothing to do, and you're doing it.
And there's lots to do. Well, this is what I'm
And there's
curious
lots to do.
about. What do you think what's your opinion about our collective healing around the non-binary? How can we serve the collective and heal?
I think it's about I let me check in really quick. There's a couple of things I would say about that. Like one, even just what I just did there, actually checking in, because I can be one to just like, I have an answer, I'm smart, and like what's actually true for all of me versus what's true logically, or what's going to sound the exact right way I need to say it. I think that's one of the best ways because when I think about how binary we are, it's because at least my story, is that we are in a fight or flight. We're in a one or the other. We're in a, I have to do something and I have to choose the right thing. There's a stress to it. So when we can check in and slow down, there's a way we can actually ask ourselves, what is open for all? What does it look like to not be in a structure where there's one or two? There's me or there's you, but this collective oneness. Like, that's something that I love too. When I think about aliveness, I also think about oneness, and I think about like the non-binary, or just being outside of the binary itself, is understanding the multitudes that exist within me. Like, I am divine masculine, and I am divine feminine, and I am divine interdimensional being. And that is what I invite people into, that question of, are you just one thing? Like, if I'm in a binary, do I have multitudes? If you do, then are you really one thing? Are you just in a binary of one or the other? You're actually, and people, when I ask them that kind of question, it's like, oh no, I am so many things. Like, so then you're not binary. But
Well,
we
I think
have
about
to,
that like personas. I mean,
yeah.
I have personas when I do persona work that are male. And I have never really identified, like in a broad sense, and I understand that there's a spectrum, but I've never identified in a broad sense as non-binary. But I certainly have an experience of experiencing different parts of myself as male or female or something in the middle, I guess. Dragons, other stuff.
Right,
Whatever.
exactly.
Yes.
Right. I think about the power of language for the collective healing around the binary because, I think about at the time I met Jay, being really transparent and vulnerable, I wasn't connected to anyone non-binary. And at that time, we were having a class and there were maybe 3 different people who identified non-binary. I kept getting their pronouns incorrect. And it was like a construct that my mind struggled with. My mind had, because of language, I think, right, had been taught you put people in this category or this. There are literally 2. So maybe you're not just one, but you're one of 2. And so my mind kept struggling to fit in the they category. And just by being challenged around that and keep using they pronouns, it's like not just opened up the gender reality. It's just like, oh, everyone has a they. And when I experience somebody using that pronoun they, it like loosens the construct or something, where I feel more open to all of the parts of who they are energetically, their dragon part, right? Their male, their
Unicorn part. I bet
like,
unicorn
yeah,
part.
there's all these different parts of who they are. And so I just, that there's some movie they did about an alien coming to this planet and she learns the language. And the way their language was constructed allowed them to time travel because it wasn't sequential. And it just talked about the power of how
Arrival.
the word, yes. You're like, yes, thank you so much that you said that because it would have been really awkward if we never knew the name when I just said it. But it really, like, if we go back to what we said about we start out as babies and then we get programmed, there is some, socialization around the physical, but a lot of that programming is the language, right? Or even to say that person's a Black person, that person's a white person, like, we created that, right? We created those constructs and we reinforce those constructs with language. So when we challenge the language, we challenge the construct.
I did the 4-day Byron Katie. It's called the No Body Intensive, and I like picked that as the first thing to do, but it's like really early in my practice around her teachings. But we spent half a day on language and how things get passed on. So she was like, think of a banana. Everyone think of a banana. Picture a banana. And what was true was every single person pictures it differently. Some it was peeled, some it wasn't, some it was cut, some it was bruised, some it was yellow, some it was green. It was like all these different things. And we did a ton of work on that and how like the first time you eat something when you're a baby and someone's like, that's a banana. And your mom or dad's like, this is banana. And we get an idea of a thing. And it really has so much to do with how they're presenting it and what they think about bananas. And it got really meta at some point. And that's the whole point, is to like language yourself right out of your own reality to some extent. But I found it so impactful. I tattooed a little banana on my arm just to remind me to question, like, where are all these stories and beliefs and where's it all coming from? And is is it coming from my experience? Is it coming from other people's stories and beliefs? And then how can you deconstruct it as much as possible? And
I'm super turned on by this conversation right now.
yeah, I've never before mapped my serious attraction to deconstructing the concept of a banana to deconstructing my concept of gender.
Well, and you know what's coming up for me, Bethany, is that you just answered your own question around what you're struggling with today.
Tell me, because I don't. Tell me, what are you saying?
Well, like you're creating conflict around the way you define banana and how everybody else is defining banana, and then you're like, well, which banana is the right banana, or which is the right way to think about banana? And it's like, and how do I figure out which one it is? Like, what's the path? And it's like, well, one, you can deconstruct all of it and go back to zero, or you could just define banana the way you want to define it because it's your reality.
Thinking about the Matrix, there is no spoon, there is no banana, and like the non-duality. Well, that's true, and it's not true. Like I can actually transcend the problem in my thinking and experience, and I'm in a body, and I'm going to make decisions, and both are true. Another paradox. I think if we hit on 3 paradoxes, we've completed a podcast.
I mean, this has been a really good conversation. I love how every time we record, it goes to these different places where I'm like, wow, I really didn't expect, like, I didn't expect race to come up in this conversation today, but also just the way that the non-binary as it is of like moving into the both and constructing our reality in a way that we can accept all that is, and the paradox that there aren't 2 different things that we don't have to choose between. Like that feels like the theme that's coming forward. That, and I guess I like to stamp that for myself, because I feel like the universe speaks through us when we set an intention, and I feel like what the universe is speaking through us is moving in the direction of collective healing, is moving in the direction of embracing a non-binary reality and conceiving and breaking apart the ways we conceive of it in binaries.
In dualistic binaries. I mean, that's what non-dualism. I mean, that's what it's pointing to, not to. it's not these 2 things, one or the other. It's outside of that. So, yeah, fascinating. Good chat, guys. Thank you, Jay, for joining us and sharing.
Do you have any last words, Jay? Anything feels incomplete or pressing or wants to be spoken?
No. The only thing that I want to say is I've had a great time. And I love you obviously so much, Lauren, but I've loved getting to talk with you too, Bethany. Like this has been super fun. And I just want to say, like, I love the 2, like, I re-listened to your very first podcast before this, just to like get into the vibration of what you 2 would be like. And I just feel really encouraged that you're putting this content out, and like the connection that the 2 of you obviously have. Like I'm inspired by that, and I just want to say thank you, because I think it's amazing, and I'm going to be pumping this out and promoting it, because I think that people need to experience like all of this. So yeah, that's all I would want to say.
Look at Bethany. She's swooning over that. Just swoon.
Our editor, right before we got on, my editor was, I didn't even like notice what question he was asking me. Double A does our editing of our podcast and does our promo and stuff. And he was like, something was happening and I put up like the wrong thing, and he was helping me fix it. And he was like, have you got any feedback from your friends? And I was like, what? Like, I didn't know what he was talking about. And I was like, oh, like about the podcast in general? And I was like, yes, so much. And I have an appreciation folder in my iPhoto in my phone. So whenever someone pays me an appreciation, I screenshot it and I put it in this folder. And it's really great when you're feeling kind of down. It's a great shift move, but tell me about it on a day when you're feeling great anyways. It's like, get ready to expand yourself. And so I was just like, yeah, it is. And I sent him like 8 screenshots of cool things, like nice things that people have sent us, like responding to the podcast. And his first thing was like, maybe you'll just do this for your full-time job sometime. And I was like, that would be pretty fun. I'd be surprised, but that would be pretty cool.
Like, people have a podcast as their full-time job. Like, that would be a concept that I would really have to. Like, I don't even understand.
How?
My pump was primed for somebody resonating with what we're doing here. So thank you, Jay.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Love you, Jay.
Jay, yeah. Thank you. I'm loving all the conversations you invited us into. So, and I have like an idea of creating like a special close friends filter on Instagram stories just for you.
Ooh.
And, like, dancing to a song and sending it to you. Not committing to it, but not a clear agreement. But I have an idea of that. Maybe I'll work towards it. I'll ease myself into some Instagram story dancing.
Yeah, that does seem like your next. That seems like your next frontier.
That's my next big edge. Dancing on a private Instagram story. God help me. Thank you, Jay. We'll see you.
Thanks. Bye, love.
Hey, everybody. If you've got any feedback for us, we welcome it, or ideas about future guests, email us at healingcollectivepod@gmail.com. Our website is thehealingcollectivepodcast.com. We are at Healing Podcast on Twitter, and we are at Healing Collective Podcast on Instagram. Special thanks to Monda Creative, who edits all of our podcasts, and Two Tall Women Productions, who produce. Thank you.